Hello, I'm delighted and frankly awestruck to introduce today's keynote speaker. Martin Edwards likely needs no introduction. He's a Crime Writers Association Diamond Dagger award-winning author of some 20 mystery novels, with not one, not two, but three recurring detective series and settings spanning 1930 to the present day. These have been nominated for more crime writing awards than I can count. His most recent novels include the Golden Age homages Gallows Court and Mortman Hall, and his next novel, The Crooked Shore, is part of his contemporary Cotswold series. We're pre-recording this interview, but you're watching on the 19th of July, and that book's out in just 3 days' time on the 22nd. You also know Martin as an editor. So now we're in a bit of a golden age revival at the moment, and this conference is a symptom of that, but Martin's work has been a driving force. In particular, his work with the British Library on its crime classics series, some of which are strategically behind me. A former chair of the Crime Writers Association, he's now the president of the illustrious Detection Club, whose previous presidents include G.K. Chesterton, Dorothy L. Sayers, and a certain Agatha Christie. And there's more. Martin is the author of non-fiction books, including the essential volume on the Detection Club, The Golden Age of Murder. And more recently, he's edited How Done It, a stunning collection of insights from crime writers past and present on the mechanics of their work. It's an absolute privilege to welcome Martin Edwards to the conference. Thank you very much for being here.
Well, thanks, Jamie. That's a very generous introduction, and I'm delighted to be part of it. It's a wonderful thing, and even though we're not together in person, it's much better to be doing it online than not at all.
Oh, definitely. Okay, so we're going to kick right off. I wanted to ask for your origin story, really, how you got into crime writing. Were you always interested in mysteries?
Well, the answer is a very definite yes. I've got a very long anecdote, which I'll try to keep short for these purposes, but it dates back, and I can't date it precisely, to the 4th of July, 1964, so long before you were born. And I was 8 years old, and I attended an extraordinary event in Cheshire, which is where I was born and grew up, and where I still live. And what happened was an American millionaire from Hollywood came to live in Cheshire in his retirement. He hosted a village fete, and he decided to hold a film show, but it wasn't any ordinary film show. It was the world film premiere of Murder Most Foul, starring Margaret Rutherford as Miss Marple. And he didn't stop there. He invited her to open the fete, and she arrived in a helicopter. I can see her now descending from the skies. It was a truly extraordinary, bizarre occasion. I was 8 years old. This was a story that got into the national press, because that sort of thing didn't happen in Cheshire in those days. In fact, it never has happened since. But for me, it was a transformational moment, because it introduced me to the detective story. Murder Most Foul isn't Citizen Kane, is it? But I was very smitten with the idea of the amateur detective, the clues, the red herrings, the twist, the surprise at the end. And I went home, and my grandmother was living with us at the time, and she had some Agatha Christie paperbacks. So I started reading Murder at the Vicarage, and my fate was sealed. And it was sealed in two particular ways. Firstly, that love of detective fiction and all types of crime fiction, not just the classics by any means, everything that's good. But also at the same time, even at that tender age, I wanted to write my own crime stories, detective stories. And so those experiences, as we know, experiences in childhood are very powerful and influential. It's certainly very effective in my case, in terms of embedding this devotion to the genre, and it's something that's been with me ever since, both as a fan, I'm still a fan, and as a writer.
Thank you. I love that. And I'm going to throw away my pre-prepared questions just to, first of all, I think Poirot would really appreciate I can't pin it down precisely, but it was the 4th of July this year. And I love that story, because it's like if Agatha Christie wrote James Bond, it would be in a Cheshire Village fate with a helicopter. Do you think it's important to be a fan if you're going to take detective fiction seriously as a writer or as a scholar?
I know a number of really gifted crime writers who aren't that interested in the genre and don't necessarily see themselves primarily as crime writers who didn't come deliberately to the genre in the way that I did. So no, I don't think it's essential. I think, as with so many things in life, there are no absolutes. It's a question to some extent of personal preference and instincts and leanings. I've always been very wedded to the detective story. I've tried to be a bit of an evangelist for it in all its forms. But there are plenty of good writers, people working today and people in the past who weren't necessarily fans. So I don't think the two things are essentially and inextricably interlinked. It's just that in my case, they most definitely are.
Yes, definitely. And it seems to be specifically a Christie connection, at least to start with. But your work is very diverse, and definitely there are homages in your novels. And of course, you've done extensive non-fiction writing and research about a whole range of writers. Is Agatha Christie a special case, or are we perhaps privileging her a bit much over and above a lot of other talented writers?
Well, Christie is a unique phenomenon, and there's just no getting away from it. And I can certainly remember a time when Golden Age was very much out of fashion. And indeed, my first series set in Liverpool, a contemporary series at the time, featuring Harry Devlin, my concept was to combine the sort of gritty urban Liverpool backdrop with the Golden Age plots. And the first of those books, All Alone People, was published 30 years ago this year, so a long time ago. And that book did well. It was nominated for the Creasy Dagger, and it led to the whole series. But the one thing that never happened throughout all that time was that no critic ever picked up on the Golden Age elements and ingredients in those stories. I found that a little frustrating, so I became more and more obvious. Started name-checking Golden Age writers, including Christie. And one book in particular, The Devil in Disguise, is very much a Christie homage, and still the books were very generously reviewed, but still nobody picked up on it. And that really told me that I was completely out of kilter. I spent most of my life being very, very unfashionable. I'm not ashamed of that, but that particular enthusiasm for Golden Age fiction was just something that wasn't mainstream at all in those days. Christie was still around, of course, and still selling well, because she's always there in that unique pocket. But all the rest of the writers, with very few exceptions, such as Sayers, maybe, possibly Edmund Crispin, they were all forgotten and neglected. And in fact, I became so frustrated that I moved on to a different series that was less.
I'm sorry, Martin, I think you've frozen.
This summer. But that was less consciously Golden Age in style and approach than the first series. And it was because I felt it was time to move on as a novelist, really.
But what you have done more recently, as we're in this resurgence of interest in the Golden Age, is you've published two novels I'd like to bring up. Going Gallows Court and Mortmain Hall. Am I pronouncing that right?
Mortmain Hall, yeah.
Mortmain Hall, sorry. In 2018 and 2020. These are novels I think it's impossible to dislike. Lee Child has a wonderful quote about them, which is on the cover of one, I think, a pitch-perfect blend of golden age charm and sinister modern suspense. And they just strike me as this amazing balancing act, working as golden age plot-driven novels, but also modern, psychologically informed suspense thrillers. So was it the resurgence of interest in the golden age that inspired you to write them, or?
It was really, Jamie, and thank you for those kind words, which do mean a lot to any writer, that's for sure. And of course, by this point, I'd written The Golden Age of Murder, which I worked on for 10 years. It was a niche project of personal passion. I never thought it would do very much as a book. I was completely blown away by what happened to it in an extraordinary way. It was successful, and so that encouraged me, because I'd actually lived long enough to see the wheel of fashion come around. So finally, it's a bit like a stopped clock that's right a couple of times a day. Finally, I was in the right place at the right time, and I was someone who was very much imbued with the love of the golden age, and I thought that it was time to write a book set in that period. I'd written one standalone about the Crippen case, a novel, published by a relatively small press, but I'd not otherwise written historical crime novels. But I decided to give it a go, and I decided that because I was doing something very different, I would do something very different in every way. So I didn't plot it in advance. I began with the character of Rachel, this rich and extremely ruthless young woman who arrives in London mysteriously, and a young journalist wants to find out what her agenda is. That's Jacob Flint. And I really began with nothing more than that. I didn't have a publisher or a contract, and it was a different type of writing as well as a different period and a different character. So in many ways, it was a big gamble. But I think the one thing that I can say about my career as a crime writer is that I have always written books that I believed in personally, even if I wasn't sure that many other people would believe in them. And I've been fortunate that I've had a day job that has meant that I've not relied on the writing as my main income stream, and that is an advantage. There's no two ways about it. So I've been able to please myself with what I write, and certainly in the course of my career, there have been plenty of setbacks. But the last few years, I've dropped very, very lucky, and it turned out that Gallows Court found a wonderful publisher who really was looking for something different. I think it is fair to say it is a different sort of book. There aren't many books very much like it. And so I got a 2-book contract. So the result was that I wrote another about Rachel, Mortmain Hall, and then I got a further 2-book contract. I've just written the third in the series, Blackstone Fell, and I really enjoy getting back into the golden age in the way that you describe. Of course, I'm writing in the 21st century, so it's different from Christie's experience as a novelist. But I love playing with these ideas and tropes and trying to do something a bit different with them, but in a fun way. But also trying to come up with plots that if Agatha had a look at the story, I like to think she might have thought, yeah, that works, that hangs together. That's what I'm aiming to do, really, to write something that works on its own terms as well as a 21st century novel.
Yeah, and I would say you're definitely succeeding, if that means anything.
It does.
I'm very excited to hear that there'll be not just a third, but a fourth. I want to come back in a second to what you said about playing with the themes and tropes and having fun with them. But first, I just want to ask a really geeky question that might be miles off the mark. I love Rachel Savernake. As a Christie geek, I had to ask, did the name come from the Hollow?
That was indeed a big factor. In fact, Allingham also used that surname, but it was a name that appealed to me, partly because of the snake serpent-like sound, the euphony of it. So it came from there. And then I had another character also named after a forest, Delamere. So there's a weird sort of connection there. But yes, you're absolutely right. And I think you might be the first person who's picked that up, Jamie. It was a sort of passing acknowledgement of Henrietta in Valhalla.
Well, I think we all love Henrietta, we all love Rachel, and we all love Easter eggs. So this idea of paying homage to the Golden Age was one that really struck me as a researcher, because at the moment, a lot of sort of the new angles in crime fiction research, and I've been guilty of this, is de-emphasizing the plot element and sort of pointing towards the fact that these were writers who could write social commentary and have key themes and thematic discussions. And what I find really refreshing about your work, fiction and non-fiction, is that you celebrate the thematic side of crime fiction, but also the plot and the joy of playing a game with the author, which is something some of us, some writers are now trying to sort of push under the carpet a little. I particularly loved in Mortmain Hall the use of a clue finder, which was a totally new thing to me. I actually had to go on your website and look up what it was. Could you explain a little about that and how you came to draw on it?
Yes, well, yes. I was very happy to do that, and there is a clue finder in the new book as well. I have to say, because many people have asked me to produce another one, so I've been happy to oblige with Blackstone Fell, the third book. But the idea really comes from this very Christie-like concept of the detective story as a game between the reader and the writer, and the challenge to the reader, to use an Ellery Queen phrase, can you solve the mystery before the great detective reveals all? And of course, there were plenty of books, not Christie. It's implicit in Christie, but it's not explicit. There were plenty of books, Anthony Berkeley, Millward Kennedy, various others, Rupert Penny in Britain, Ellery Queen and others in America, would have a page where the reader is challenged to come up with a solution. In America, there were the Harper Sealed mysteries, where you had to break the seal if you wanted to find out the solution. If you were really miserable, you were allowed to take the book back with the seal unbroken. You could get your money back, but you wouldn't find out what the solution was. That was a sales gimmick of the Golden Age. But the idea of the clue finder was a development of this idea of the challenge to the reader. And the idea was that the writer is saying, I have played fair with you, and I've put the clues in the text. I've tried to misdirect you, but the clues are there. And just to prove it, I'm going to set them out. And writers started doing that. I think the earliest example I'm aware of is J.J. Connington in the late 1920s, but it was picked up by a number of other writers, including Freeman Wills Crofts, John Dixon Carr, Elspeth Huxley, Rupert Penny, quite a number. Even Kingsley Amis had a little gesture to it in the 60s with the Riverside Villas murder, although a very small gesture, it has to be said, just three clues. But C. Daley King, the American psychiatrist who wrote very Byzantine, convoluted mysteries, had very elaborate clue finders at the back of some of his books. And those were really my model. I wanted to push it to an extreme and really put in a lot of clues to the mystery. And part of my thinking was this, that my idea with Mortmain Hall was to write a mystery novel where the reader may not be really sure what the mystery actually is. There's a lot of stuff happening, a lot of incident, a lot of murders, a lot of bad people coming to grisly ends. But there is, I think, quite a lot of uncertainty about what the story is all about. That's very deliberate because I wanted to hide the real mystery within other mysteries. So you've got to peel away the layers. And so it seemed to me that if I was doing something rather mischievous like that, something a bit out of the ordinary, that it was incumbent upon me to show to the skeptical reader at the end of the book, well, yes, it's all there. You may not necessarily have picked it all up, but look at these references in the text. I think there are 34 in Mortmain Hall, so there are lots of clues, but when you're reading it, because you're not necessarily sure what the story is all about, I think that perhaps deflects you from them. So it's a variation on the Christie idea of misdirection, if you like.
I love that, and I hope we see an even broader revival of the Clue Finder now. And
it will be great. Yeah, it'll be great fun.
And maybe you'll need to find something even more obscure in the archives to bring out in your next book.
Maybe so. Yeah,
that's wonderful. We haven't even touched on the Detection Club and your role within it. Probably should mention that it's your other big Christie connection. She was president of the Detection Club from the 50s to the 70s, and you have been since 2015.
Yes,
some of our delegates might not be too familiar with the club. Could you maybe briefly introduce it and talk a little about it?
Yes, the Detection Club, which celebrated its 90th birthday during the pandemic, so it wasn't that much of a celebration, apart from the publication of How Done It, which we're very proud of. The Detection Club is, we think, the world's first and oldest social network of crime writers. And it was started off by Anthony Barclay, alias Francis Isles, began with a series of informal dinners at his house. And in those days, of course, there was no social media, no Facebook, no Twitter, no internet, no web. So writers very often didn't know each other. Crime writers didn't know each other. So Barclay's idea was to gather the people he thought very opinionated that he thought were the cream of the cream and socialize. And that idea was very well received by his guests, and it morphed into the formation of a club in 1930. G.K. Chesterton became the first president. Christie and Sayers were among the founder members, and they were very enthusiastic. And Christie, despite being so reticent as an individual, was passionate about the Detection Club right to the end of her life. She really believed in it. She continued to attend, and Max Malone used to come along with her. And I've seen correspondence where she's very robust in seeking to protect the ethos. So quite a responsibility on her successors not to mess up. And it was always really a small social dining club, election by membership. So it's got that sort of quaint, old-fashioned aspect to it, which is inherent within it. And of course, now, since the 50s, there have been the professional organisations in Britain, the Crime Writers Association, and even before that in the States, the Mystery Writers in America. Those are the professional organisations, and very important they are. The Detection Club is an anomaly, but it's a fun anomaly. It continues to meet when pandemic rules permit. We're hoping to have a meeting in this very summer with social distancing. So we are trying. And the Detection Club now has about 60 living members, and it remains very collegiate, and it funds itself. It's always been on the brink of insolvency throughout its existence, but it's funded itself through publications. So you may be familiar with the early books, such as The Floating Admiral, a collaborative novel that Christie contributed to, the Scoop and Behind the Screen. She also contributed to those. Those were BBC serials by Detection Club members. And I had the idea of producing a slim volume of essays by maybe 20 members of the club and maybe a few past members, deceased members, donated gratis to raise funds for the club. And the members accepted that idea with enthusiasm, and the manuscripts started to roll in. And before I knew it, really within the space of that year that I floated the idea, we had not only a book, but a very fat book running to 500 pages with almost every living member contributing, everybody from Le Carre and Val McDermott, Ian Rankin, Ellie Griffiths, Anne Cleves, Peter Robinson, Peter James, Alexander McCall Smith, the list goes on. And they all did it because they wanted to support the club. It's very, very humbling, apart from anything else. They all contributed. They got other things to do with their time. They weren't getting paid. The estates, the Christie estate, the Sayers estate, they all contributed. So they did it to support the club. And I think that's rather wonderful. That generosity of spirit tells you something about the esteem that the club is still held in, and shows that, anomalous though it may be, it's a relic of the past. It's part of crime fiction heritage, and I believe it's very well worth preserving.
Definitely. Testament to heritage, testament to significance, but also testament to community. At the
exactly
heart.
Exactly so.
Yeah, and that's wonderful. And I think we're just about out of time, but we will be providing all delegates with a link to your website to find out more about your work, of course, and details of all the books we've discussed, including the new one, The Crooked Shore. It has been an absolute pleasure, Martin. Thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure too. Glad to be part of it. Thanks for asking me.
Thank you.